Hello and welcome back, and it's time for another SSD review and benchmark, and today we are looking finally at the TeamGroup T-Force Cardea A440. It is their SSD for prosumer gamers and certainly for PS5 support. I know you guys have been requesting this for a while, but I specifically wanted this version. We will hopefully eventually go on to the Pro Special version that was announced recently for PS5. This is still massively PS5 compatible as we speak. I'm going through the editing of my PS5 test with this SSD, and again, it worked beautifully there. Hopefully there's some of that on screen. If not, that video should be live in the next day or so. Arriving in 1TB and 2TB, this is an SSD, again, like a very small selection of drives out there that really do provide a stupid amount of extras with their devices. Now, I say stupid amount, let's rein that in that statement a little bit there. So, first and foremost, it arrives with two different heat dissipation options internally. Now, a lot of brands who have entered into this PCIe Gen 4 market were not ready for the application of these SSDs outside of PC architecture. So the majority of M.2 SSD vendors out there, and particularly in the Gen 3 generation, but specifically and in a larger degree on Gen 4 generation, they were producing heatsinks that were pretty much exclusively for PCs. Looking at those big towers that you put these drives inside, and if you're a PC gamer, you know what I mean. You've got a lot more space to play with there. Plus, you've got those big rear-mounted fans, and you've got a lot of airflow. You've got a lot of space there, so you need your heatsink to be pretty big so it can occupy that airflow as it dissipates and draws all of that heat from the NVMe SSD. So those users have always been happy. However, this new generation of users may, and again, I talk about PS5 gamers, but it's not just them anymore. It's gaming laptops that are starting to have PCIe Gen 4. It's shuttle gaming rigs. It's more compact gaming solutions, and particularly editing solutions that need that heat dissipation, but they don't have the physical space or the breadth of airflow that they need those chunky heatsinks. And this is where more compact heatsinks come in, using graphene or thin pieces of aluminium utilized on these SSDs to assist that heat dissipation. And the reason I liked this drive, and it was the reason why a lot of you got in touch about it, is one, for the price tag, you got some damn fine performance. This is a Phison E18 controller SSD with some serious legs. But on top of that, it's got two different heat dissipation options internally. Let's have a look at that. So let's face it, a lot of you are considering this drive specifically for that reason. So there's our SSD inside there. We all talk a little bit about that. But what we've got inside is we have got that graphene metal panel, which is kind of a malleable single-use metal piece of kind of film there that goes on the top. And it's also got the adhesive panel, of course, to attach this, the chunkier heatsink. And this is a surrounding heatsink for your drive. And by surround, I mean the SSD sits inside a small gully area there where you can, if you choose to, sorry about the loud noise on the mic, you can apply a thermal panel in there if you choose. But on top of that, you have this wonderfully well-designed heatsink there. The valleys and the gunnels there, very, very thin, lots of them in there, very well designed to kind of control and capture that airflow within the grooves. And it's also angular as well, which means that the the airflow that it's not utilizing, it's not going to obstruct the airflow to the other components. Now, again, we've tested this inside the PS5. That's a heatsink with the top panel inside with the space for the SSD. I haven't quite applied that right there. And this, I've got to say, as heatsinks go, this one was pretty efficient. Also, it just fits in the PS5 slot. It's incredibly tight when you get it in there, but if you're using a single-sided SSD, you can get this in that PS5 slot there, but only on a single-sided SSD, and maybe without that base level panel. It raises it just a fraction too much, and it can inhibit and hit that top panel of the PS5 there. But that said, a lot of you want to know about this, and don't worry, we will touch on that. But as far as the heatsink goes, I love that stuff. But you didn't come here to learn exclusively about a heatsink. You wanted to learn about this SSD. Now, This SSD arrives, as mentioned, with that Phison controller. Let's face it, we all know it by now if you've watched these videos. The Phison E18 controller is currently the SSD controller of choice for PCIe Gen 4x4 connectivity. Again, there are other ones out there like the Integrit that we talked about recently. And again, we're working on a big comparison with a few SSDs from either side there. But in sheer price point and sheer performance and throughput, it's very hard to rival. The 1TB arriving at $159 and the 2TB arriving at $319. It's not the cheapest, but it's not by any degree the most expensive either. And again, those heat shields there are included in there. And again, this is largely single use, it has to be said. That graphene panel there, but at the same time, this one, use it as many times as you like. Now, that Phison controller is accompanied by 1 gig of DDR4 memory here on the 1 gig, and that scales up to the 2TB as well. And again, that controller there, lovely nestled there in the middle. They've not moved the controller to the top there. They've got middle placement there for the controller and the extra one there on the side, along with that DDR4 memory underneath there too. As you can see, it's a single-sided SSD, but it's a single-sided SSD that they've managed to cram 4 256 gig NAND modules onto there, which is really, really impressive. It seems a little dense on there. A lot of 1TB vendors that have gone down that 4 times 256 gig NAND route for the 1TBs would often utilize either side or put the memory into 2 modules either side, but they've gone for the single side on there, which I know a number of you that are going to use that graphene panel are going to feel all the better for. Also, that memory, it's worth highlighting, is 96-layer Micron. So again, 3D TLC NAND there on board. So again, lovely stuff, box ticked, exactly what I would expect. Not only at this price point, but at this quality level. I don't think they'd be allowed to really sell it higher than they have done if you didn't have any of that on board. In terms of performance, they have rated it, again, it's another 7,000 megabytes per second, which, can we all just take a quick moment to think, 7,000 megabytes per second, we're getting so used to it that we've stopped appreciating just how incredible 7,000 megabytes per second throughput over something as small as this actually is in terms of sequential read. And again, that's on the 1 and the 2TB. I'm going to be interested to see in our test shortly if we can exceed that, because again, this architecture, 7,000 to me is a little bit conservative. And I know we have pushed the boundary points of our 6-core Intel i5 11th Gen test rig before, but I'm hoping we can push this SSD a little higher than 7,000, even just a pinch there. Now, in sequential sequential write, has to be said that the 1TB is definitely the loser of the pair, arriving at 5,500 megabytes per second sequential write, which is still fantastic. But we've seen a lot of SSDs arriving on the market now at the 1TB level crack that 6,000, even early doors. The 2TB, on the other hand, different story entirely, hitting 6,900 megabytes per second there on the 2TB. So again, I'd be interested on the physical makeup of that 2TB, how they've distributed that NAND, because they must have gone two-sided at that point. And if they have gone two-sided, have they gone 8 modules? Have they gone 4 modules? I'd be really interested to learn that, and maybe I'll look at those specs later on and find out more. If I have, it's on the screen there for you. Now, IOPS is one area where this SSD left me a little sad. Not a lot. I think it's because a lot of the, massive I'm not going to use the word monopoly, actually. I'm going to say the company that's got the lion's share of the market. In terms of SSDs, they've been cracking the 1 million IOPS from 1TB and higher. With this SSD here from TeamGroup, we're going to call it just TeamGroup or T-Force, the A440. This one has a reported read IOPS, that's 4K random at 650,000, which is still very, very good. But bear in mind, some of the brands crack 1 million at that point. Now, in terms of write 4K random IOPS, it's 700,000. So again, still very, very good. But again, I'm going to be very interested in the testing if we can get that a little further, because this architecture, particularly with the latest update, and we will be making sure to have the latest firmware update on board, I swear we have seen this kind of architecture go higher than that. So I don't know whether their stats are trying to be a little bit more conservative, or that they have just decided, do you know what? We've done tested, and we're not going to fudge the numbers. We want to give you the guaranteed performance, not the flexible could be, maybe, should be. Now, in terms of durability, that's another area where this SSD, I'd say, sits there at the top, better than around 70% of the market right now. There's the usual 5 years warranty, of course, and in terms of terabytes written or TBW, you're looking at 700 terabytes and 1400 terabytes respectively to the 1 and a 2 TB drive there, which leads us to a 0.38 drive writes per day. So again, that's 380 gigabytes can be written to this per day on this 1 TB without you doing anything where they say it's not going to live within the confines of its performance, in terms of durability and sustained performance over time. 0.38 is still higher than Samsung, it's higher than WD, it's not higher than the likes of the Patriot or the Seagate CUDA 530, but it's still very, very good. And in terms of gamers who are going to be doing way more read than write, particularly the console gamers, slightly less so PC gamers, that's still some great performance to be had there. Now, we're going to be popping this inside our test machine shortly, where we're going to be looking at things like AJA and ATO and AS SSD and Crystal Disk and stuff like that, as well as looking at the temperature there. Now, for our PC benchmark, it's worth highlighting that in the PC benchmark, we're going to be using that larger heatsink there, because I know a number of you who are going to be using a PC environment are going to want to have that larger heatsink to kind of capture a lot of the active airflow. In our PS5 testing, we have been utilizing one of the this heat shield here, and we're going to be applying that to it for the next round of PS5 testing as well. We're also going to be comparing temperature tests with both of these to give you some idea within the console environment, but that is for a future video coming soon. But for now, let's get this SSD inside our test machine, run our tests, and see just how well this performs and compare it against some of the other similar architecture drives. Right, so we've made our way onto the test machine here as always. As you can see, we've already installed the drive there. Let's refresh that temperature, and it's sitting at a comfortable 29C. This is with the larger heatsink there. This is taking advantage of that Cardea fatter heatsink there. We're saving the graphene for PS5 testing very, very soon. Also, we're going to have a look at the official benchmarks there. As you can see, this 1 TB here, they are saying it's going to be 7,000 over 5,000 megs at the top end there, based on their own Crystal Disk performance. We will be running similar testing here. It's also worth highlighting a little bit more about the specs on this PC in case you've not watched any of my other tests previously. This is a 6-core Intel i5 11th gen processor here, and also arrives with 16 gig of memory. Ignore that beeping there in the background. That's a couple of NAS kind of setups I'm doing for another video. It is going to beep from time to time. On top of that, it's a Windows 10 Pro setup. Also, this drive is sitting in the secondary bay. We're not using it as an OS drive here. We've already got a standard SATA SSD for the OS, and we're using that spare PCIe Gen 4x4 slot here for the T-Force Cardea, that 1 TB drive there. So, what we're going to be doing throughout the course of these tests, let's get rid of that silly little pop-up there. We are going to be looking at several things. Obviously, right now, we can look at the graph and look at the temperature. This SSD has not been running for a huge amount of time on this system, as you can see. And at initial boot, we can see that it has risen all the way up to this point. Later on, after all of the tests have been performed, I'm going to revisit this chart and see how the temperature has behaved throughout the course of this testing here. On top of that, we're going to be running tests on the following applications. The screen is going to go black every time I open up one of these applications for a brief second. That's just Windows looking for admin. So for example, Crystal Disk here, we're going to be running 3 Crystal Disk tests on 3 different file sizes. We're going to be running 3 tests on ATO Disk Benchmark there, again with 3 separate tests. We're going to be running AS SSD as well. We're going to be running 3 tests on that, and we're going to be running 3 tests here on AJA. And again, we're going to be running 3 different file sizes in those tests as well. But of course, because we are utilizing OBS for this, unfortunately, the recording of the test, I'm going to have to sever that there, because otherwise the screen recording will utilize a lot of the system resources there. As you can see, even right now, 25% of our memory there is already, 25% of utilization is being used by OBS just on the utilization as it stands. So a huge amount there. Even Chrome is being largely dwarfed just by OBS there. Now again, for those of you that do highlight that I could use a capture card, that is indeed true. Unfortunately, the capture card for this channel is being utilized for PS5 testing right now. So again, we're using this here. But don't worry, these tests are all going to be gone through one by one. They will be recorded and visible there on the temperature testing. Also bear in mind that between every single test we leave the system 1 minute to dissipate that heat. So between every test, and that includes tests within one individual application, we pause for 1 minute to allow the system to kind of reset the cache a little bit there, and also have a chance to cool down. So again, that's 4 applications, 3 tests per application, and the temperature test at the end. So let's fast forward to the completion of these tests. For me, it should take about an hour. For you, it will take a couple of seconds. Let's fast forward to the results. Okay then, so our testing has completed, and I've got to say, for the most part, I am pretty impressed. If we have a look just to start with, the temperatures throughout the course of all of our testing, we can have some idea about just how much heat was being generated throughout the course of these tests. And as you can see, all the way through, although we started at that slightly low ebb, throughout the course of the entire testing, the highest it ever got was 53. But the really impressive thing was just how quickly it was able to dissipate that heat every single time. With every test, even the most extensive ones, with Crystal Disk going first, and then Atto Disk Benchmark, AS SSD here, and finally the short, sharp AJA-based testing here after AS, I should say. All of these, heat dissipation was incredibly fast, and generally I will see, numbers this high. But this is one of the fastest heat dissipations I've seen in most of my testing over the last few months. So looking slightly away from that, let's go for the most conventionally easy to read tasks here. Let's go for a Crystal Disk Mask score there. And again, bear in mind, going back to the original specifications there, they rated that this SSD in Crystal Disk in their own testing hit 7,000 over 5,000, so that's sequential read and sequential write. And I've got to say, looking at all of these, although only on one occasion were we able to exceed 7,000 megabytes per second, and again, bear in mind they used quite an impressive AMD platform in order to do this. It was an 8-core, I believe. It was a Ryzen 7. Again, I'd have to dig back into the specifications, and I'm running a 6-core i5. But still, even the scores that didn't break 7,000 were still pretty high. But where it was really impressive is that it really did exceed quite well over their maximum sequential write there. Even the IOPS was something that I really was impressed by. Remember earlier in this review when I was complaining about the rated read and write IOPS scores there? In terms of write IOPS, it did take a bit of a kicking going a little bit low there. But on 4K read IOPS, it massively smashed that 650 that they were stating there. So again, we did see a good balance of performance there on mix, although mix write performance did suffer ever so slightly there. Overall, I'd say in Crystal Disk, not only did it live up to what they stated, but it exceeded it in a few key areas. Now, if we move away from Crystal Disk, we can have a look at Atto Disk Benchmark. We'll look at sequential throughput first, and again, we'll keep those stats down there briefly. We can see Atto, of course, is going to be utilizing different file sizes. We went for 1/4 of a gig there at 256 meg, 1 gig and 4 gigabytes of data, with the read performance there in Atto comfortably hitting there at the middle lane there at 6.5 there. So again, lovely stuff within Atto. In write, we saw a high there of 5.47 gigabytes, and again, that was fairly consistent across all 3 file sizes, across all 3 tests. If we flick over to IOPS performance, we can see that again, some lovely heights there within the large file types. Obviously, this doesn't really correspond to the 4K random that they were testing earlier, but still nonetheless, quite pleased with all of the Atto benchmarks there. We go into more detail below in the NAS Compare article linked with this video. Next, we can have a look at AS SSD. Again, a 1, a 3 and a 5 gig file test. Again, AS a little bit more strict in its sequential read and its settings there, but still very, very good stuff there. We will be comparing this against another 1 TB drive shortly. But again, lovely stats there, and even if we flick again over to IOPS across the whole 3, we still see consistently good results all the way along. Again, The read IOPS there getting much higher in the lower end, and of course as we got heavier they got lower all along, but again hitting that 7,000 comfortably there in a number of areas, even exceeding it in those right lower IOPS at 800,000 as well. Let's flick those back onto throughput, and before we compare against another SSD, let's take a little look there at AJA. Typically, AJA isn't something we like to test too much, largely because AJA is a different kind of measurement tool, and what we want to look at is these graphs here at the bottom. What we're looking at here is, were there many drops? Did the memory or the cache overlap? And again, you normally see that on oversaturated cache there on the larger file type, and we saw it there, a little dent there in the write captures. But again, still comfortably high numbers there within AJA, and definitely something I would, sort of look at in comparison to another SSD. So let's compare this SSD against one of the stalwarts of the PCIe Gen 4 SSD range. We're going to look at the WD Black there. We do have quite a lot of other SSDs within this bracket that we could look at, but let's start with the WD Black here for this video. So let's bring up the performance here on AJA, and again we're looking at 1 gigabit, so that's comparable to the one below. As we can see in write captures here at the bottom, that the Cardea there, the Teamforced SSD, was higher in write captures and indeed higher in read playback captures. Again, if we move along through the graphs, looking at the 4 gig file there, we can see again that it did exceed it in key areas, but not all. And if we go into the 16 gigabyte test there and compare them side by side, we can see that although there was an equal degree of write captures there, they didn't suffer the drop there that we saw in this Teamforced SSD as we oversaturated, but it did overall do a much better job in disk reads or playback there. Now let's move on to, let's go back to ASSD. So let's get rid of those for a little moment there. Go back into AS, compare them there. We'll continue with the WD. And let's go back into the WD stats there, bring that up, open it up, and we'll compare against each of them. This is a 1 gigabyte IOPS, so let's flick that back to IOPS, see how they compare. And again, as we compare between the two of them, overall, unsurprisingly, the WD Black wins that IOPS battle for the most part. In 4K IOPS, it looks like it had the advantage there of the T-Force, but in most of the other regards, it did seem to top it. Although, let's be honest, ASSD did give it the higher mark there at the bottom. Again, we carry on. We can flick back onto traditional throughput and performance, bring them back down together. And again, this is where that WD Black did take the lead there in sequential. And again, it was a bit surprising, really, that the sequential write was higher. I thought that would be somewhere the WD Black may have struggled, but no, it did overall win the day there between the two of them there on sequential. And a lot of that is to do with that NAND being taken care of in-house there. And again, we can carry that from all the way through to the largest capacity there. If we compare these two at the largest capacity side by side, we can see, oh, wrong one, let's bring that back. In terms of 5 gig performance there, again, the WD did just seemingly in AS just overall rule the day there over that of the A440 here. So finally, let's have a little look at those Crystal Disk scores there. Go back to Crystal Disk, bring all of those lovely ones up on screen. Let's flick away from the WD there just to try a different SSD. Let's go for the Samsung 980 Pro. Let's bring that up there. And the Samsung 980 Pro, around about 11 months old at the time of recording this video. If we look at the 1 gig test side by side there, we can see a surefire advantage there in terms of sequential performance on the T-Force SSD there. But in terms of IOPS were significantly higher, breaking that 1 million as discussed earlier there on the Samsung 980 Pro. So let's carry on, go through to maybe the highest, the 16 gig there. 16 gigs side by side here, and we can see once again that sequential, there's no contest whatsoever. The T-Force SSD largely smashing things in terms of sequential, and even when we look at the IOPS, it did a good job on the right IOPS. It did a very good job, largely due to the distribution of that NAND. Have been single-sided but still having 4 NAND chips was obviously advantageous, whereas the Samsung being one-sided with the NAND distributed over 2 definitely hurt that write performance, but still cracking that 1 million there as their own individual spec sheets attest. But nevertheless, this SSD still holds very, very well overall in terms of overall performance, and certainly at a price point that is incredibly competitive, it makes it a very interesting and arguably better SSD choice than many out there, not just for you PS5 gamers, but PC gamers as well. And that dual heatsink inclusion with that graphite heat shield versus what I think is one of the best heatsinks that I've seen included with an SSD so far, make it a very appealing choice. And if you are seeing this SSD arriving at decent little prices, I do recommend looking it up. Maybe not at the launch price, if you can find it a pinch cheaper than some of the prices we talked about at the intro to the video. I've done a link in the description to their product page here to learn more about it and where to find it. And do stay tuned for a follow-up video soon where I'm hoping to take a closer look at the dedicated PS5 version of this SSD, which has a potential 40B model as well, and that potential 1 million cracked IOPS there at the higher capacities, with better performance all the way through, and even with the 1TB cracking that 6000 megs, one of my early criticisms in this review video of the A440, it's a solid SSD that's more than just a relabel. It actually has a lot more on the table to offer. But this has been my review of the Cardea A440 from TeamGroup. Do look out for it. Should be links in the description to this. We've got PS5 testing, if not already live. It'll be with you in the next day or so. And of course, the full written review with further testing in the description. To go ahead there to learn more, click like if you've enjoyed the video, subscribe if you want to learn more, and of course, take advantage of the free advice section over on NAS Compares. Genuinely free, made by two humans, me and Eddie the web guy. We answer every query on anything data storage and networking. We don't do anything with your email. It's a genuinely free service. Why not use it? There's a donate button. Use it, ignore it. It's up to you. Otherwise, I will see you next time.